You're watching a Highwire Media podcast.
The world is full of cults. In the United States alone, it's estimated there are up to 10,000 active cults of all different types and sizes. But even that number is just an estimate, and it's impossible to know how many different cults there are across the entire world. Though cults are typically defined by their authoritarian leadership, use of coercive methods to maintain control of their members, and exploitation of their members for the leader's personal gain, possibly from a basement, what people often remember best about them are the insane beliefs peddled by their equally insane leaders. Today we'll be looking at 5 such cults, ranging from lighthearted misunderstandings about technology to dangerous and violent acts of crime. So right off the bat, we got universal medicine. It began in April of 1999. When a 35-year-old Serge Benayan was sitting on his toilet in New South Wales. It was about that point that he began hearing voices that charged him with becoming the leader of Universal Medicine, or Unimed. According to the Unimed website, Serge was a highly accomplished and successful tennis coach, but decided to abandon that life to form his organization dedicated to healing. Though he really had been a professional tennis coach at the time, he was unemployed and bankrupt. Despite having no medical background or qualifications, he built his cult by selling esoteric healing products, workshops, and courses. The foundation for his cult was based on the work of Theosophist Alice A. Bailey, who Serge claimed to be a reincarnation of. He has also claimed to be the reincarnation of Pythagoras, St. Peter, Imhotep, and most commonly, Leonardo da Vinci. His daughter is allegedly the reincarnation of Winston Churchill as well, because why not? Even before forming Unimed, Serge demonstrated his natural talent for manipulating people and destroying families. 4 years earlier, his 14-year-old tennis student Miranda began living with Serge and his wife Deborah. Shortly after Unimed was founded, Serge and Deborah divorced, and Miranda became his second wife. If that sounds gross and predatory, well, then allow us to introduce you to Ed's most famous practice, esoteric breast massage. As we said, Unimed claims to be an organization dedicated to healing, and they target and exploit cancer patients by promising to heal them with this technique. Serge and the organization claim that the massages can cure and prevent cancer by rekindling femaleness. Another technique used by Unimed that claims to be for healing purposes is called deeper femaleness. This hands-on esoteric healing technique involves massaging and manipulating a woman's pubic area and pubic bone. Unimed claims that this healing method is great for sexual assault recovery, in addition to charging people in order to perform these techniques with absolutely zero medical value. Serge also convinced people to donate as much money to Unimed as possible. Because reincarnation was a key principle in the cult, he would tell them that if they didn't donate everything they could, then they would suffer in their next life. This led members, many of whom were terminal cancer patients, cutting their families out of their wills entirely. Nearly everything taught by Serge and Unimed ranges from problematic to just downright dangerous. For example, the cult has taught its members that children born with disabilities and those who suffer from sexual abuse are being punished for actions in a previous life. Given that they teach that such abuse is just a form of karmic justice, one could certainly infer that they have a fairly lenient stance against abusers, especially when the abuse comes at the hands of high-ranking members of their cult. They also teach that the different skin colors associated with various races was a conscious evolutionary choice on the part of humans, and that accidents are choices as well. If a person accidentally stubbed their toe or stepped on a Lego, that was their choice. Unimed has faced considerable legal issues over the years from former members and their families. In 2018, an Australian court ruled that Serge was the leader of a socially dangerous and socially harmful cult, was a charlatan who makes fraudulent medical claims, and had an indecent interest in girls as young as 10, who he caused to stare at his house unaccompanied. Unfortunately, rather than facing justice, Serge instead was able to relocate to the UK, though a British court ruled that Unimed is a cult with some potentially harmful and sinister elements that has still been allowed to operate within the country for some reason. Then we have the Fellowship of Friends. Robert Burton founded the Fellowship of Friends at the age of 31 back in 1970. Burton was an elementary school teacher living in a Volkswagen bus, but he managed to convince his first group of followers that he possessed powers of a superior being. Originally, the Fellowship was based on the teachings of Russian philosophers, which I'm not going to try to pronounce their names, and a philosophy often referred to as the Fourth Way. The Fourth Way teaches that people are essentially asleep, their souls trapped in their bodies by their own personalities, and that deliberate efforts must be made on a consistent basis for their souls to wake up so that they can reach the afterlife. Burton later incorporated esoteric beliefs into his organization as well. From the outside, the Fellowship mostly looked like a fancy club for rich people. Their headquarters was known as Apollo, a 1,200-acre estate in Oregon House, California. Not only was the compound home to over 600 of the group's members, it was also the location of the Renaissance Vineyard and Winery, where the organization produced award-winning wines from 1982 through 2015, when the vineyard shut down. It was through immersion in the finer things in life, be they wine, opera, or artwork, that Burton believed he and his followers could achieve higher consciousness. Since Burton was living in his car when all this started, naturally he was going to need to incorporate a 10% tithe into his religious doctrine in order to be able to afford the luxuries he felt were necessary for spiritual enlightenment. By the mid-90s, the Fellowship's yearly income was already in excess of $5 million. But while the Fellowship of Friends is officially categorized as a non-profit religious corporation, many critics, including ex-members, have called it a cult. And this certainly isn't without reason either. To start, there are the doomsday prophecies. Originally, Burton predicted that all of humanity, except for Apollo, would be destroyed in the global nuclear holocaust of 2006. And no, you're not misremembering that. It didn't happen. The date of the prediction just keeps getting pushed back each time, resulting in a dip in membership. But beyond doomsday prophecies, Burton has also claimed to exert total control over his followers. There are monetary fines for any perceived transgression, from smoking cigarettes to sex outside of wedlock. There are also allegations that the group has forced women to get abortions because it wasn't time for children to be on the ark, being Burton's nickname for Apollo, since it would be the last surviving bastion of humanity following a global devastation. In addition to punishing sex outside of wedlock, the Fellowship is also reported to have a hardline stance against homosexual relations. As with most cults, the rules apply to everyone except for their leader. As there have been decades of allegations that Burton was grooming and sexually assaulting male members, including minors, there are also allegations that men would be recruited from around the world and flown to Apollo on religious visas, only to discover that providing Burton with sexual favors was allegedly a required part of their stay. This alleged practice has been equated to sex trafficking. Allegations of Burton's sexual predation first emerged in 1984. They've resurfaced numerous times since then and resulted in at least one settlement. However, perhaps the most high-profile and completely unrelated controversy surrounding the Fellowship came in 2022 when it was alleged that the organization had infiltrated Google and was essentially running Google Developer Studio at the time. GDS was run by Peter Lubers, a longtime member of the Fellowship. A former video producer working for GDS filed a lawsuit after being fired from the company, claiming that he was fired for trying to raise concerns about the group and the influence that it wielded in GDS. According to the lawsuit, GDS was circumventing the normal Google hiring process by using a staffing firm to hire members of the Fellowship. Allegedly, these employees were given preferential treatment and were more likely to be promoted within the company than those who were not members of the Fellowship. While this does sound like run-of-the-mill cronyism because it was tied to membership in a religious organization, it allegedly ran afoul of religious discrimination laws. The lawsuit was settled in December of that year. The terms were not disclosed, but Google did state that Lubbers was no longer with the company. This was not the first time a lawsuit like this had been filed. In a 2008 lawsuit, a woman received $6.5 million in damages from staffing agency Kelly Services for failing to promote her because she was not a member of the Fellowship. But even with that large financial judgment, the Fellowship of Friends and its 1,500 to 2,000 members were still able to largely fly under the radar. Despite all the allegations of cult-like behavior, sex crimes, and other dangerous behavior, the group maintains its religious corporation status and is still led today by Burton, who is now 85 years old. Then we have cargo cults and John Frum. Though this phenomenon had occurred in the decades prior, the years during and immediately after World War II are the years most synonymous with the formation of what are referred to as cargo cults. These religious movements were referred to as cults in the anthropological sense, though they are far removed from what most people would consider to be the hallmark traits of cults today. Cargo cults aren't violent, they're not dangerous, they don't exploit people, and they're not coercive. So, well, what exactly is a cargo cult? These religions were created by indigenous people on islands in the South Pacific, especially Melanesia. When World War II broke out, the Japanese began building temporary military installations on these islands. The Allied powers quickly followed suit, and these bases brought with them boats and planes full of mass-produced supplies, the likes and quantity of which the natives have never seen before. For many natives, this was their first time seeing people from outside the islands. When these installations received cargo shipments of food and clothing, they would often share them with the indigenous people in exchange for the natives acting as their guides on the island. After the war ended and these bases were abandoned, religions were created to try and bring back these cargo shipments that were no longer arriving on their islands. The newly created religions were interesting in that they were a direct creation of Westerners occupying the islands. Yet the religions, which also tended to be political movements as well, rejected Western influence in the work of colonizers and Christian missionaries. Rather than acknowledging the cargo was brought to the island by Westerners, they instead tied it to their ancestral spirits and rituals. Of all various cargo cults that were created during this time period, the most famous is John Frum. On the island of Tanna and Vanuatu, John Frum is a mythical figure who does not appear to be based on any single person, but who is depicted as an American World War II serviceman. One possible origin of the name is that he is John from America. Followers of John Frum believe that he will return to rid the island of white colonizers and bring riches back to their island. Cargo cults often copy the behavior of those who had occupied the islands, recreating their actions as rituals to bring back the cargo planes. To that end, a leader of the John Frum movement created the Tanna Army, a non-violent group used for ritualistic purposes only. Every February the 15th, which is known as John Frum Day, the army would don shirts with the letters TUSA and march in a military-style parade. They also built makeshift airplane runways in an attempt to summon the cargo planes back to their islands. As the years dragged on without the return of cargo drops of food and clothing, membership in the movement steadily declined. It's still an active religious and political movement with around 500 members, but that's down from 5,000 in the 90s and many more in the decades closer to the war. And then we have Heaven's Gates. Heaven's Gate is one of the most well-known cults of the last century, despite actually being relatively small. At its peak, Heaven's Gate only had about 200 members. It was founded in 1974 by Bonnie Nettles and Marshall Applewhite. The cult was a mix of Christian millenarianism, New Age beliefs, and ufology. Their core belief was that human bodies were imperfect, and it was their goal to ascend to the next level, the evolutionary level, above human, or TELAH, or simply heaven. Originally, this was going to involve bringing their bodies along with them, like some interpretations of the rapture. Heaven's Gate taught its followers that an alien spacecraft was going to pick them up and give them their new bodies fit for heaven. However, this belief was challenged in 1985 when Bonnie died from cancer. For many, the fact that her body died before ascending meant that Heaven's Gate was alive, or at least that she and Marshall were not the prophets they claimed to be. In an attempt to regain control, Marshall had to restructure the beliefs of the cults to allow them to abandon their bodies in a dignified manner. When the Halley-Bopp comet reached its closest point to Earth in 1997, this presented an opportunity. An amateur astronomer reported seeing a UFO trailing the comet, and the potential UFO, including an alleged picture of the spacecraft, received considerable airtime on Coast to Coast AM with Art Bell, a nationwide radio show dedicated to conspiracies, UFOs, and other nonsense like that. Marshall and Heaven's Gate took the comet's approach to Earth as the sign they were looking for. and it was time to exit Earth in a dignified way so that their spirits could board the spaceship trailing Healy Bob, where they would receive new, perfected bodies. Membership in Heaven's Gate was believed to be just 39 at that point. All 39 members, including Marshall, dressed themselves in black t-shirts, black sweatpants, and brand new Nike Decade sneakers before taking their own lives at the end of March 1997. Just before this event, the Heaven's Gate website was updated to state, quote, "Our 22 years of classroom here on planet Earth are finally coming to their conclusion. Graduation from the human evolutionary level. We are happily prepared to leave this world and go with Bonnie's crew. However, while it was believed that all of Heaven's Gate died that way, that may not be the case. Now, 27 years later, the official Heaven's Gate website is still online. It isn't being updated, but someone has continued to keep its registration and hosting active. It is believed that the site is being maintained by two people out of Phoenix, operating as the Tula Foundation, a religious nonprofit organization that is potentially tax exempt and that has a long history of suing people over the use of Heaven's Gate's intellectual property, of which they claim ownership. And then we have the Order of Nine Angles, or O9A, or ONA. The Order of Nine Angles, or ONA, was founded in the 1970s, or possibly the 60s, in the UK by someone writing under the pseudonym Anson Long. Though there has been heavy speculation on who the author of these works was to date, the true identity of Long has not been confirmed. ONA is a militant satanic organization specializing in occult, black magic, and terrorism. They eventually began incorporating elements of neo-Nazi ideology, and following the terrorist attacks on 9/11, they incorporated elements of militant Islam as well. The organization has a decentralized structure, and it prefers the term associates to members. It also refers to itself as a collective rather than a religion or cult. ONA describes its doctrines as traditional Satanism, believing Satan to be a genuine supernatural deity. This is in contrast to other modern satanic groups such as the Satanic Temple, an openly atheistic group that uses the literary Satan as a symbol of rebellion and is known for its use of malicious compliance to combat violations of the separation of church and state. But as followers of a supernatural Satan, ONA's views and practices are much less lighthearted. They believe that human history can be divided into eons, each lasting 1500 to 1700 years. They believe that the current eon should belong to the Western world, but that the natural order of things is being interfered with by Judeo-Christian influences. The group advocates accelerationism to bring an end to this Judeo-Christian society and to create a militaristic new social order known as the Imperium. According to ONA, establishing this Imperium is necessary for Aryan society to colonize the Milky Way. And if that sounds vaguely familiar to any tabletop gamers watching this, the creation of Warhammer 40K's faction of space Nazis known as the Imperium does in fact predate ONA's incorporation of neo-Nazi ideology. This wasn't all concerning enough. ONA also openly advocates violence and terrorism. This includes sexual assaults, even of children, and Long's writings heavily imply, though do not explicitly state, that sexual assault is necessary for a man to ascend to the Übermensch. Because the organization is decentralized and does not have any member list, it's unknown how many members there are. Estimates put it somewhere in the thousands, but there's nowhere to be sure. What we can say for sure, though, is that the number of crimes perpetrated by members of ONA and their associates number a lot. There are numerous reports of members being arrested and convicted of sexual assault, very frequently involving children, possession of illegal pornography, which has been promoted by ONA's official publications, and of course, murder. There are also several groups affiliated with ONA that have committed heinous crimes, such as the maniac murder cult in Russia and Ukraine. ONA is among the most dangerous cults operating today, and there is currently a push by British politicians to have them classified as a terrorist organization. Now, before we wrap up this episode, we'd like to thank our sponsor, Fastest VPN. Let's be real for a second. If you're online in 2026 without a VPN, you're basically walking around with your digital front door wide open. Your data, your browsing history, your location, all of it is fair game. And that's where Fastest VPN comes in. Fastest VPN keeps your internet connection secure, private, and fast. No throttling, no sketchy tracking, no buffering halfway through a video because your ISP decided you've had enough fun for the day. Whether you're streaming, downloading, gaming, or just scrolling at 2 a.m., Fastest VPN protects your data with military-grade encryption across all your devices. The best part, it's ridiculously affordable. Fastest VPN offers a lifetime plan, not a monthly subscription that quietly drains your bank account. One payment and you're covered for life. Phones, laptops, tablets, everything. So if you want to protect your privacy, bypass annoying geo restrictions, and actually use the internet the way it's supposed to work, check them out today using the link in the description and secure your browsing activities. And now, of course, if you want to support the channel, you can buy us a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/LarryMLease. As always, you can find us on all major podcast platforms, Good Pods, Amazon, Spotify, anywhere you get your podcast from. And with that, thank you so much for watching and listening. We will see you next time. Take care.